All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our virtual TL Insider Fireside Chat with guests Rajan Bansi, head of RBC InvestEase, and Rhiannon Rosalind, CEO of the Economic Club of Canada, as they lead a virtual discussion on building financial resilience for youth in Canada. Here are some quick housekeeping rules. Please make sure to ask any questions or leave any comments you may have in the chat box at the bottom of your screen throughout the event, and we'll open up an audience Q&A at the very end of the chat. Now, thank you kindly, Rajan and Rhiannon, for being here today. We really appreciate it. And I'd like to introduce our host, Jason Maganoy, Head of Business Development at St. Joseph Media. Thank you, Jason. Now take it away.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Chantal, and welcome, Rhiannon and Rajan, to this Fireside Chat. Welcome to all of our TL Insider members today as well. Today, we are going about how we can set up youth and young people for success right now, as well as what those who face economic challenges can do to help protect their future selves and more. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I'd love to start with an introduction or introductions from the both of you. So who are you? Tell us who you are, and let's start with Rajan.
Thanks, Jason. Rajan Bansi. I currently head up RBC InvestEase. That's RBC's digital online investment management service. Lead a fantastic team. We helped launch this business a little bit more than 2 years ago, aimed to get Canadians off the sidelines and investing for the future with no minimum investment. Rhiannon, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Rhiannon Rosalind, and I am the President and CEO of the Economic Club of Canada, a position I've held for the last decade. I've had the opportunity to work with so many incredible Canadians, speaking about the most important economic issues. But what I think I'm most proud of is I am the founder of the Junior Economic Club of Canada, which is our not-for-profit arm. So we've been working on financial literacy programs and working with young people all across the country to help them better understand their place in the world of economics and finance. And so it's just such a pleasure to be here with all of you today and to have this really cool conversation.
Thank you. So I would like to start, we always like starting with a personal story. So what was your first job? And this is for both of you. What was your first job as a youth, and what did it teach you about money? My first job when I was growing up was I was a maintenance guy. So my mom got me a job as a maintenance person in an apartment building. I replaced ceiling tiles. I did it for $8 an hour. I felt like I was the richest kid on the block. I was. So people were coming, well, man, Jay, you're so rich with your $8 an hour. I never saw the money. My mom kept it all. She saved it in some savings account I never saw ever again. But in the end, in terms of what it taught me about money, it taught me that, man, you have to work pretty hard, especially at the beginning. And I'd love to hear what your first job was as a youth, and what did it teach you about your finances? So I'll have to start with Rhiannon.
Okay, so I want to just kind of let everyone know that I'm going to try and be as open and honest and transparent with everyone today as possible. So I grew up in a pretty tough situation. My mom was a single mom, and there was a lot of struggle in my family. There was violence in my home. There was addiction in my home. My first job was actually at 10 years old. I started my own little company. I was walking dogs in my neighborhood. So I would go door to door and I would try and canvass to see who had dogs. And then we would start to create our little database of community dogs, and we would start to walk them. And for me, this was really driven by my sense of wanting to be able to fit in at school, wanting to be able to have some of the things that I knew I couldn't ask my family for. And so I just really felt like I had to get out there and do it on my own. So I've been an entrepreneur since I was a child, and I think that you'll see that reflected in some of the conversation today. It taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about being able to take an idea and put it to action. It taught me a lot about learning to work with money in an early time, and it taught me that I really love to meet people and do things that I'm passionate about.
That is a fabulous answer. And before I move on to my own answer, I just want to say, Rhiannon, it's honestly for me, it's such an honor to share some time with you, to be on this panel. You dedicate your life to uplifting other people, and it's very inspiring. And that's a truly remarkable story. From from my own history, Jason, I know my first job should be one, but I'm going to give you two. It's just kind of how I roll. When I grew up, things were different, and in many ways, when I think about social media, they were easier, and other ways, I'm not sure, just different. Maybe our parents were more neglectful, but my first job was probably around 12 or 13 years old, delivering newspapers. I grew up in a home that didn't have very much money, and there certainly wasn't any extra money for me with regards to activities, clothes, fun stuff. So I had wanted to do a paper route since I was like 9, because newspapers were a thing back then. So I had a paper route. And the first thing that I learned there was that, to your example, it was a lot of work to earn $8 or $11. So that was the first learning that was kind of stark. And then when I was 14, by the way, about the paper route, the other thing that was different is parents actually let their children go more than 10 meters ahead of them and be out of sight for a period of time. I have a 5-year-old. We don't do that. The second is when I was 14, I lied. I said I was 16, and I worked in a factory in Pickering that would manufacture Christmas ornaments. And what was incredible to me was I come from a working class family, but I had never seen where my parents actually worked, and I just built an affinity for what they dealt with. I was 14. I was surprised to deal with racial epithets from grown adults. I was surprised I had to get to work by 6:30 a.m. and work in sweltering conditions. I was surprised that management just expected you to skip your lunch and your break. But what did I learn? It was really hard to earn money. But the other thing that I learned about myself is that when it came to working hard, I could do this. And I was glad that I had the opportunity to do it. But when it came to money, the actual earning of that money was very hard.
Wow, that I'm taken aback by those answers. And I guess my first question for you, Rajan, is so how do we encourage financial literacy then for young people? Obviously, it's a very different environment now. We don't learn about financial literacy really in school. So are there any best practices that you'd like to share that people can share with the young people in their lives right now?
Sure. I would say if you consider any difficult topic in our society, climate change, any sensitive, difficult topic that it relates to children of any age, the worst thing you can do is not talk about it. The worst thing that you can do is pretend that it doesn't exist, because who else are they going to talk to, right? And one of the challenges with money, I find, is a lot of parents, and you don't even need to be parents. You might have nieces or nephews, but a lot of people don't talk about money because they think it's culturally taboo. Some people might think they're protecting their kids about money because this is a big, scary thing you need to deal about when you're older. And a lot of people might not actually think they know that much about money, but you do. And I think just having the conversation about money is important, because it shows that money is important. And I often share the story. Again, I grew up in a different time, but my father every second Friday would pick me up from school. We would drive to Woodside Square, for anyone in Scarborough who knows where that is. We would go to a bank that doesn't exist anymore, the Permanent, and he would have his paycheck in hand, and he would line up, he'd fill out his deposit slip, he'd have his bank book, he'd put his money in, he'd get a little bit of money out. And I was around for that. So I knew that it was important. And I would ask questions like, what's a deposit slip? What's a check? Why do you have this money? And we would talk about it. Now, truthfully, that was really the extent of our conversations about money, other than we don't have a lot of money. So, mom's at work for 14 hours because we need money, right? Like those were the conversations around money, and they weren't necessarily fun and they weren't pleasure, but they were important. So as I got into high school and then onwards into university, I always knew that money was important in some way, and I need to develop my own personal responsibility around money. And I think that's what we need to do. We don't go to bank branches as much as anymore, and we certainly don't fill out deposit slips. Everything's done digitally. But maybe even when you're on your phone or when you're in the grocery store, you're making you're tapping to pay, to explain that this is money, and we don't have an unlimited amount of it, and we need to be judicious in how we spend money on this today and save some more for tomorrow.
I love that link to this idea of the personal responsibility tied to money. That was one of the things that when I started out making money, I was very poor at. And one of the things is, in terms of my financial role models, my first financial role model was like your father was my mom, and my mom's advice, literally as a Filipino mom, every day was just oh, you have money, save it, save it, save it. She'll text me out of the blue in the middle of the night, save your money. So I guess my question to Rhiannon is, so who's your financial role model?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, Oprah. And the reason why I say that is only because I believe in wealth generation. I believe in abundance, and I believe in this idea that when we are actually well, that we can actually do more for others and we can do more for society. And so I think that she represents that. She's obviously doing very well, but she's also done an incredible amount with that wealth. And I think that that's a really important symbol, because when I grew up, and to what Rajan just spoke of, we actually are picking up our money, our money framework all the time, whether we realize it or not. So depending on what we grew up with and how we see our parents interact, even if it's unspoken, we are actually taking in, what we think and feel about money based on what we see. And so for me, as I mentioned, growing up in a pretty difficult home, there was a lot of trauma around money. Money was the reason why my mom was, being hit in my home. Money was the reason why I saw, people crying and fighting. And I just, as a young person, of course, there was no financial literacy in school. I felt like money was bad, or that there was, something wrong with us and our family. And I heard a lot of rhetoric around, rich people not being people that cared, and all of these different pieces. And why I'm bringing this up is because I went on my own journey, and as I went to school and I got my education, and of course working multiple jobs to pay my way through, I had this really broken relationship with money. I wanted it. I wanted to be able to create a life for myself that was different than what I had grown up in, but I also had these other beliefs that were counter to that. So I found myself that when I started to generate my own wealth, I didn't know what to do with it. I felt like, who am I now? Am I still the community minded person if I'm the CEO of the economic club and I'm doing well? What does that mean? And so I want to really break down that for all of us, the money information and the financial literacy is available. There's no need or excuse right now in this world where everything's at our fingertips to not go out and seek that knowledge. It's there for you, whether it's being brought to you or not, you can seek it out. But one of the things that I think is so fundamental to this time is starting to actually understand our emotional and social connection to money. When we see our family members struggling, or when we see certain members of the population struggling, we start to not be able to make peace with this idea of actually making money or saving money for ourselves. We don't realize that that ends up being a reflection of how we feel about ourselves, how much we love ourselves. I see money as energy, and for a long time, I didn't know how to keep my own little bit of energy for myself. I felt like I had to give everything in order to be of value to society. And it's been a real reframe for me to kind of go deeper into those notions and start to break around some of those ideas that I held subconsciously based on my experience. Mm-hmm.
Well, that actually takes me to my next question for you, which is, you mentioned this really interesting emotional connection to money. And one of the things that we're noticing in Canada is that incomes are flat. They're flat across the board, especially for younger people. It's harder for younger people to save for milestones like education and home ownership. And on top of that, the pandemic has just shattered economic resilience and amplified inequality all across our society. And young people are working those essential jobs. They're the ones on the front lines of the pandemic as well. So at the Economic Club and with your work with young people, what trends are you seeing when it comes to our economic recovery, particularly for young people? And is there any light at the end of the tunnel?
Now, I want to preface what I'm about to say with just having compassion and understanding for the fact that there's so much struggle right now. And as I speak to young people on the ground, I know that there's a feeling of hopelessness right now, like that you're never going to see a time like your parents did, where you have a job that's secure and you get to work in the same place for many years and earn a pension and do all of those things. The gig economy is a real thing. And I feel like a lot of young people feel like they have to take things from many different places in order to create that stability and base. One thing that I always encourage, and I am an entrepreneur at heart and an innovator is that we don't have to always look for the answers or solutions within the same framework that always was. So if we're trying to recreate what our, older generations were able to do, it's not available in the same way. That's the truth. And so how can we start to think of new ways in order to create those stability, and that security? And one of the things that I really, really am driving people to think about is social innovation, entrepreneurship. You may not be able to, in the same way that your parents did, be able to work in a particular job and grow up that rank and have that security. But you do have friends and you do have people in your networks that are all looking for ways in order to be able to create financial abundance and opportunity. So get creative, going out to other friends and thinking, what can we do on the side in order to create an income stream for ourselves? I know a lot of young people who went out and together they purchased, a house and rented it out or whatever else, rather than thinking about it like, oh, I go to school and then I earn this money and then I get my own mortgage and I buy a house. It's those that have thought outside of the box in the framework that I see actually being able to leverage this time. The other thing that I would say is, don't just think about financial currency as your only currency marketplace, because there are other currencies right now that are incredibly valuable and important, data being one of them. So as we start to kind of understand how the new economy is shaping out, and we understand that the marketplace, especially the digital marketplace, holds a lot of opportunity and possibility, I encourage you to start going out and consuming information on people who have started interesting things. There's great podcasts out there that tell you about people that have started up interesting businesses and side hustles. And this is the world that we live in. It's about actually creating a new pathway as opposed to following the traditional one that always was.
So that's actually a really perfect segue to another question I had for you, which is, you'd mentioned this idea of the precarity of work and the gig and young people being trapped in this gig economy and having to wear a lot of different hats to create some kind of stability for themselves. So how can a young person build a career now? Like when you started, you were very young when you got your role at the Economic Club, you found immense success. So do you have any tips that you can share for anyone who's watching today? What are your top three? These are three things that you should definitely do when you're out there at the beginning building your career.
Again, I want to say that I think because of the way that I grew up and some of the hardships that I faced, I was a high school dropout at 15. Like, I was about to repeat the cycle of my family. I found myself on the pathway of drugs and alcohol and just really not knowing where to put the pain that I had inside of me. I ended up having a bit of a wake up call that year and realizing that I was literally about to repeat the cycle. I ended up getting back into school and being the first person in my family to even graduate high school, let alone go on to university. Because I set these small goals for myself early on and I challenged myself to do things that were outside my framework and outside of what I saw around me, I started to develop a confidence in myself. And it sounds silly to say that something that I did at 15 actually reflected how I got to the point that I am now, but I developed this unwavering trust in myself that despite the circumstances around me, I knew that I had one thing for sure. I was unafraid of hard work. I was unafraid to put myself into situations that maybe others wouldn't because they feared that they didn't know enough. I knew I didn't know it all, and I was willing to admit it, and I was willing to do anything. When I was first hired at the Economic Club of Toronto, I was in an entry level events coordinating position. And I took that as like, this is the most important thing in my life. And I'm going to learn every single piece of this and do this to the exact best of my ability. But I also always thought strategically around where in this organization do I see a pathway for growth for me? If I didn't see a pathway for growth or a pathway where I could continue to do something, I wouldn't have stayed. And that's really the truth. And I know that a lot of people harp on millennials right now, or harp on young people, saying they're so impatient and they don't just realize that you have to kind of plug it out. We are, like I said, in a different time. I don't think you do have to plug it out in that same way. And so I would say lean into what you're drawn to, which is if you're hungry to rapidly move and you find that you are unable to do that in your space, and not everyone wants that, but if you are, then you have to find ways to continue to be able to grow that energy inside of you. I would not be where I am without being able to actively pursue those ideas, and push forward towards them.
I love that concept of thinking strategically, sort of every step of the way. And my question then is now for Rajan. And when I was on the come up, and I came out of school, I was my first job. I made $16,000 a year. on my first job.
Probably thought you were rich.
No, I did not, because I'd realized that I was terrible with money. So at the same time, I was really terrible with money. So I had a bunch of debt. I had just created a bunch of debt. So one of the things that ends up happening now when you're thinking strategically, and when you're thinking about something like financial resilience or investing, you're thinking about your future self. You're thinking about how you want to pay your future self, what you want to do down the road. But young people, and I remember this, man, on the come up, tons of issues, debt, really expensive housing, especially if you're living in Toronto. We don't get paid as much as previous generations. So how do I deal with the right now, but at the same time, think about future me? And do you have any tips for a young person that can build economic resilience right now, make the most out of the situation right now, so that they can at least get a glimpse of how they can invest in that future version of themselves?
Sure. And I'll share my personal philosophy, Jason, that you've heard before, so it won't surprise you. It might surprise other people. Yeah, I lead a investment management business at RBC. Would it be great if every single person one day opened an account with InvestEase? Sure, of course. That's not actually what would make me happy, because if people did that and they were financially miserable and thus miserable and stressed, that's just not how I'm kind of wired. So I would say we have to acknowledge that our financial health, it does affect our overall health. It is a point of stress. It is a point of anxiety. And if there is something financial in your life that is bothering you, that's what you need to pay attention to. So for some folks, it might be an enormous amount of credit card debt. And I will be the first person to say that if you have credit card debt, you don't need to be investing right now. You need to retire your credit card debt. But what I say to everyone is, you have to, and I know from listening to Rhiannon previously that she's aligned with this, you don't get anywhere if you're not nice to yourself. So from the outset, no judgment. You have to demonstrate kindness to yourself. And what I mean by that is, you just have to write out a playbook, like how much money is actually coming in. And I still, because I'm old, I guess, I still write things down. But if you want to do that digitally, it still counts as writing it down. But how much is coming in? And instead of writing like how much is going out, how much actually must go out? So how much must go out to put a roof over your head? And be realistic. If you live a certain distance from work and you have to take transit, don't fool yourself into thinking you're going to walk an hour and a half uphill both ways, and on the way back, like every day. How much is it going to cost you to operate your life? And that's just the pure necessity. And then what's left, that's really what you have to determine. What are you going to do with that? And a certain portion of that money, you have to spend it on yourself. And again, that might sound counterintuitive from a guy who works at a bank for an investment business, right? But like, you just have to, and that's just realistic and reasonable. So you have to think about, but when we're allowed to go to restaurants, how much are you going to spend on restaurants? How much are you going to spend on travel? How much are you going to spend on clothes? You should, because you're worth it. And if it means something to you and if it makes you happy, you should do it. My encouragement to you is you just shouldn't spend it all there. So it's just part of a reasonable plan, and whatever's left, and just try to be, again, reasonable and good to your future self, whatever's left, it's still your money. But instead of having, say, $100 or $1,000 in 2021, you're putting it aside. So in 2023, you'll have $1,000 plus whatever it earns on the version of Jason in 2023. But I do think the starting point is, if even before you get to counting the what's coming in and what's going out, if there's something that's bothering you, you need to address that. You need to get under it. And if you need help, you need to engage with someone. And, it might be a student loan, it might be a credit card debt, because you got to manage that. It's going to affect you in so many ways. But bigger picture, you do have to have some sort of a personal plan, like what's coming in, what's going out, and then what can I do with what's left to take care of myself for enjoyment today and for that future version of myself, where in some way or another, you're still going to spend it on yourself or someone that you really care about or something you really care about.
This actually ends up being a question for the both of you, but I'd like to stay with you, Rajan. You had mentioned like developing a plan. Are there any resources that you can recommend for young people to take a look at when they want to start planning to gain that financial freedom you were talking about? One of the things is like, I've been getting a lot, for example, I'm really diving into my own financial wellness and financial literacy journey. I'm getting all of my financial wellness tips from TikTok. And it is super good. I'm killing it now. And it's mainly because of TikTok. And I'm getting really into cryptocurrency because, man, there's tons of cryptocurrency and tons of enthusiasts on that particular channel. So my resource to the audience, if you're not on TikTok, For You page, Finance TikTok, it's actually pretty interesting and there's some great information there. Do you have any resources you'd like to share? And this is for both of you. We'll start with Rajan.
Yeah. I mean, two, the first one I'd like to call it the internet. I find that it has a lot of information, perhaps too much information. But I think everyone, between TikTok and whatever social media app or like what's on Reddit, like there's no shortage of content that's out there. Like even from our perspective, we publish a decent amount of content, but for it to mean something, you kind of have to know what you're looking for. So that's the challenge with the stuff that's online. What I find interesting about money is, for the people who deal with us, they range in age from 18 to 93. I can't speak for the person who's 93, but for most other people, from what we see online or when we talk to them, how did you hear about us? It's because they talked to somebody else, and it might have been their partner, it might have been their parents, and sometimes it's parents who talk to their kids. I would say if you have, I just think talking about money is healthy, and this is I'm gonna kind of drift for only 3 seconds into something that I think is more germane to the domain of the economic club. But we often look to schools, and we look to the government, and we look to like these other bodies and agencies to address these societal priorities, and we should, and it's important, and it should be discussed there, and yet it should be discussed in other places. It should be one of the questions when you get together with your friend over coffee, and it can be as simple as, because hey, friendship's about demonstrating vulnerabilities, right? Hey, Jason, a little embarrassing, stupid question, but like I work at a bank. All these people talking about like RSPs, TFSAs, where do you go for that type of information? And how did you educate yourself? Because you seem to know what you're talking about, right? It's much like the same process by which people look for good travel destinations or like good places to hang out. Again, when we're allowed to do that kind of stuff. Talk to people that you think know what they're talking about and that you would trust and who would have your best interests at the center. And that's just in your personal life. When it comes to, say, your commercial interactions, similarly, you have to, I think to some extent, you have to determine or define who do you think has your back. And when you engage with this, it's because it's going to be this person on behalf of an institution. What are your questions and what do they know that's going to help you? Because I'm going to emphasize, it is about you. It should always be about you. And you might be pitched a solution or a service or a product early on. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but it might happen. And you just have to remember, why are you engaging with this person and what's the objective? And you are in complete control. The one positive thing about the current 2021 is certainly unlike when I was coming out of university, the investment landscape in Canada is such that whatever you want to do, there are more than a handful of commercial enterprises who are dedicated to solving that problem for you and quickly. So everything is on your side. Access to information, low cost, digital fulfillment. And I think that's truly fantastic.
What about you, Rhiannon?
Yeah, I have to agree with the idea of actually having conversations around this topic. And that is truly what we've been doing at the Economic Club, obviously, for all these years, is just inviting more people into the conversation. We've created a resource and a tool. It's our newest program called Mindfulness and Money. It really looks at the relationship to money and the economy through the lens of mindfulness and well-being. That's a free resource that's available. You can go to our website and check it out. Sorry to shamelessly plug my own resource, but it is free, and we're really truly trying to help people connect to this deeper understanding of the relationship that you have with money. One of the things, Jason, you said that I loved is you said money role models, like one of the first things you said in the beginning of this conversation. And I think that there is such a lack of this desire to have a money role model, to be able to see someone who reflects the values that you hold. But the very first thing we have to do is understand, what are our values? And so again, I may have different values than Rajan or than you, Jason, in terms of what I'm looking to do in my life. And a lot of the times I feel like we go in this autopilot mode where society sort of tells us, like, go to school, go into this particular field, then get a job, then work, then try to, put some money in a, investment account and buy a home. But why? What if that's not what fulfills me? What if I find travel is my most fulfilling thing and I want to, build my financial portfolio around that opportunity to be more liquid so that I can do and have those experiences? Like, you've got to be able to get into your own self first and map out, if there was no other social pressure or parent or condition on you, what do you really want? And I see that all the time. I see people so hungry to just do the thing that everyone beside them is doing. Like, we're all on this race to one place. And unfortunately, what happens is it's not until we get to that destination point that we've told ourselves it is the be all end all that we realize we might not be fully fulfilled there. So I'd love to see a generation of young people that are actually thinking more deeply and actually creating that plan of where they really want to go, and then being able to write that playbook, like Rajan says, where you're able to actually think about those pieces and determine how you get there in that way. And it's not going to be the same old, same old. I think we're all sold this conformity, or this one concept of what success looks like. Success doesn't have to look like the house with the 2 cars it doesn't have to be that. It can be other things. And so I think that just having the freedom to be able to think that way is important. And so when you start to determine your values, for me, I kind of distill them down to 4 words. So my 4 words for me that are in my true essence of who I am and what I want to be, I see myself as a visionary. So I want to be able to be visionary in what I do. I want to be able to create. Second, I see myself as an artist. I am a writer. I am an entrepreneur. I'm an innovator. Third, I see myself as someone who is deeply interested in consciousness, in actually evolving my sense of self. So I want to be able to spend my money on those kinds of experiences, whether it be meditation or travel or different things. I know that that's where I want to spend to be happy. And the last for me is freedom. I want to be able to be more mobile, to move around, to perhaps live here or there, or do those kinds of things. So being able to distill down those core values and then looking for people in your circle, whether you know them or not, that seem to be embodying the values that you admire, and reach out on LinkedIn, reach out and DM somebody and ask if they'll have a small conversation with you, and just ask them how they did it, and start to talk to your friends about the things that you desire to do, because collectively we have a lot of power to create. When we are just on our own and siloed off and trying to read information on a screen, or going one-on-one to a place that ultimately might also have a product that they're trying to sell to you, it's hard to really find out until you know who you are first. Yeah.
I think that is incredible advice. Just that idea of thinking about those core values that you have for yourself, And then you can build out aspirationally based on those values, and then making sure that everything you do is tied to them. I think that that's so important. And then the other thing that, I've been hearing, this idea of like this financial literacy wellness, like one thing that I will say too is that, separate of the values, but the going from 0 to 100, like getting somewhat financially literate is actually not that difficult. So I'm thinking, man, I'm somewhat literate now in terms of my financial literacy and wellness, but man, if I had just a little bit of the knowledge I had now back when I was making $16,000 a year, that 16K was actually not that bad, especially at the beginning. So that's really great to hear. So we are now going to be opening it up to questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A chat box. And we have some questions here. So we have a question from Mona, and this is for both of you, so you can both pipe in if you feel you can respond to this. But Mona's question is, how do you engage youth who don't watch webinars like this about financial management, or those who aren't even interested in talking about money and learning about why it's so important? So how do you get them interested?
I know.
Rhiannon, go ahead.
I really like to trick my audiences into being in places, and I'm being very transparent about that. We've been known through the Economic Club to bring some really big name thinkers and speakers to the country. We had Michelle Obama here, we had Barack Obama here last year, and what we did is a 1-for-1 model where for every ticket that was purchased by a business leader, we gifted another ticket to a young person 30 and under. I know that if that young person had to go out and buy that ticket, they may not have been there. But in them being there and being invited into the room, you can start to understand that you know a lot more than you think you do. And you are more involved than you even realize already. So I think it's about also the language that we use. I love to look at money and the economy through the lens of pop culture, through the lens of music and art and all of these other ways that we can communicate about these themes and ideas. It doesn't have to be like a boring textbook or, a financial literacy, basic a toolkit. It doesn't have to look like that. It really can be conversational. It can be fun. There's so many ways that we can engage and start to learn about how people are thinking and operating. I have a bunch of different interesting podcasts and things that I engage with. I was just trying to pull up because there's a really amazing person that I like to follow. His name is Ramit. I'm going to pull up his last name while I let Rajan speak for a second, and I'll let you know because he really puts out some really interesting stuff. But like you said, TikTok and Instagram, like there's great accounts to follow that have really, really interesting stuff going on that's bite-sizable, and I engage with it too that way. So I really like to learn from all places.
Wonderful. How about you, Rajan?
I don't know if there's much to add to that. I'll just do the secret that I saw everybody else pull in high school and university, is just kind of repeat what the smart person said. And I think in part, like I think about my 5-year-old, and I think if there's a trick, I think the trick is figuring out again in a 1-to-1, like the person or people that you're dealing with, how do they like to learn, and what do they care about? So one of my best friends, we were talking last week about how his son. And he was a really competitive guy, my friend. Like his son got a 70% in like grade 11 or grade 12 math, right? My buddy's all like upset about this. And I said to him, I got 70% in grade 12 math, which is about like 15 percentage points higher than I got in like what was in OAC calculus. And he was shocked. And I said, when you get bored, it's hard to care. And that's kind of like how I think about school, right? Formal education, that like don't focus so much on grades. Like you would be surprised at how many people just kind of get bored and you get disengaged, and money's the same. And so, we started talking about, he's like, so how do I make math more interesting? And I said, well, put up shelves. And he's like, what are you talking about? I said, to actually put up shelves, you got to like not only measure the space, but measure the shelves. You got to think about the angle, like how you're going to use a level to make sure that it's going to be correct. And he might be shocked to see like how much you have to actually use math. And he's really into sports. I'm like, you might want to talk to your son about the NBA or the NHL salary cap, and how there's all these little tricks that you use to legally circumvent the salary cap, but you can only do that stuff if you're good in basic math, which is arithmetic, right? So And then we started talking about like architecture and design, and math is really cool once you realize how it's applicable in your everyday life. And I think the same is true for money with youth, right? So even when it comes to, I think one of the interesting ways to talk about social networking platforms with young people is, what are they, right? And if you think about Facebook, from my perspective, I won't say it's a crime because this is a webinar and it might be recorded, but I think it's disingenuous to allow Mark Zuckerberg to call Facebook a technology company, because it's not a technology company, right? Like, we didn't used to classify the New York Times as a basic materials company when they delivered the newspaper. It was a media company where that media was delivered on paper, right? So similarly, these are advertising businesses for the most part that are on a different type of digital platform. And I think talking to people about how that works, they might be shocked, Jason, but like your world, right? Like, what is search engine marketing or search engine optimization, and how does that work, and how are these things ranked? Math, and math is the basis of money. So I think the manner in which you can align the concept to something real to I'm always surprised how smart, honestly, all people, but especially like young children are. And the same would go for youth. What they pay attention to and their critical thinking skills are phenomenal. And if anything, we don't give them enough credit. So I think the trick is finding how do we share knowledge in a way that's fun, and they may not even know that they're learning, or if they do know that they're learning, it's a really engaging path that they might want to go down on their own.
Mm-hmm.
I love that idea of the linking to the practical. It's so funny. One of my big forays into understanding how to budget was being in a hockey pool. I could not manage my salary cap. I could not manage my salary cap for the life of me because I always wanted star players. I'd build my teams completely incorrectly because I did not understand value. It's really, really great way to position it. And this is a two-pronged question from Rachel. And the first question it's for both of you. The first question is for Rajan. The second question is for Rhiannon. And the first question for Rajan is, Rachel asks, thinking of my 16-year-old who has a part-time job, is there such thing as custodial accounts in Canada where we can invest on behalf of our kids, stocks, ETF, etc.? It's very common in the US, but here?
Yeah, I mean, they exist. I would say they exist depending upon who you deal with. Some institutions refer to them as in trust accounts. But I would just say and again, positivity. We're talking about an interaction with a 16-year-old about saving and investing for the future. Hallelujah! Like how amazing! The fact that conversation is taking place here and in that household, that's phenomenal. I almost wonder though, at 16, I think something like 60% of adult Canadians, don't have an emergency fund. And I think a lot of Canadians were shocked how important an emergency fund was in the early weeks and months of the pandemic in 2020. And for a 16-year-old who's saving that first $5,000 that you actually don't touch, but you put it aside into some sort of high interest savings account because, and I don't know the particulars of this 16-year-old, but something might go wrong. Right? Like it might be access to a computer, or they might need something for school, or the part-time job might dry up and they may still have some expenses. And just that philosophy of, you need, let's start with that safety fund. And then as they reach the age of majority, depending upon most obviously, or most likely in Ontario, I think 19, be able to invest on their own. The other option that it doesn't necessarily have to be a parent, but in this case it is a parent, is if you haven't established an RESP, that's an account that a parent or guardian would be able to contribute up to some lifetime limit. But again, that's the type of question you'd have to, is a little bit more personalized, and would have to find a financial professional just to make sure you're on the right side of the particular tax circumstances for each individual in Canada.
Mm. And Rachel's next question is for Rhiannon, which is, and what of youth who aren't side hustle types? And there's a lot of those personality wise. So what about them? How do they still fulfill their financial goals if they're not entrepreneurs?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, it comes down to that value system. So you'll notice one of the words I didn't say was security. Some people need more security in their life, more stability. They're not interested in being the entrepreneur, but that doesn't mean that they can't work for those types and be able to add value there. It doesn't have to be this particular route. It depends on your personality and what your goals are. And there are lots of great organizations and great jobs that are, I think, really, corporate Canada is reframing the way that it's looking at its younger employees and being able to provide new opportunities for people to get involved. I know so many young people want to be more community minded in terms of what they're doing and what they're coming into. And a lot of big organizations are starting to think that way. So I think that there's lots of different pathways that we can get. But I have to tell you that, no one's going to, if you're trying to get super rich, there's going to be particular risk that you have to kind of put into that. You can't have the standard, I'm going to work a simple 9 to 5 job and I'm going to put a little bit and that's going to take you to one particular avenue. But if you're looking for something that is going to take you further, then you have to be able to get creative around what that looks like, I think. And I think that's just trying to be honest. So that
And
would be
that's actually a perfect segue into the next question, which is also for you. It's from Kate. And she says, thank you for this incredibly important conversation and such inspirational panelists. As a parent, financial literacy is a constant conversation in our home. I struggle with my sons' idea that being rich is a goal. They are inundated with social media ideas of fame and fortune. While I want them to have desires for financial success, I don't want them to think this is a path to happiness as it has no end. Any ideas of how to balance this?
I think there's a lot of really great examples out there of people that have achieved that status and have had very, very difficult lives as a result of it. And I think that this really does come back down to this fundamental value that we place in society, where we really place, what is success? Right now, success is financial and sort of like power and status. And so again, I think we're trying to rework a framework where we start to understand that wellness and happiness and all of those pieces don't necessarily come just because you've got money. There's a classic line that says, more money, more problems. And sometimes that can be very true. So I think it's having very real conversations with your children and being able to highlight to them that, why do you think that this, this super rich idea is the thing that you want, and getting under the core of what's driving someone that way. That is what social media and all of these things are designed to do. But what's really, really interesting is you'll see a lot of, especially rising stars, that are posturing that way, but that's not actually the reality of what they're living. So we also have to understand that there's smoke and mirrors, and that it's, there's a certain way that we've positioned people to appeal, and that's not always the truth of what's happening underneath the surface. So again, I think when we can focus more time on connecting with ourselves, on connecting with the environment around us, people, community, we start to open up another desire within ourselves, that some of the most valuable things that bring happiness are being able to collectively contribute to things in our communities and around us. And I think that that's so important. It's so great that you're talking at home like this about these themes. I wish that was something that was happening in my household. I kind of had to get to one place to realize that it wasn't all that it was made out to be. And I think that is a really important thing.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that idea of like going back to what you were saying about the values and linking back to those values. Like as I've gotten older, I've discovered that, happiness is a really important part of my life. And there's a matrix. There's a lot of things that contribute to making me happy. And money is not the be all end all of what that is. So it's really important to keep those conversations and really being true to your values at the forefront. That's really important. Rajan, a message from Joel. Joel is young and he's starting his career and he's in a good position to begin investing. So how does he start curating his own portfolio? And he wants to take more responsibility in saving and investing. So what are the questions he needs to be asking to those around him and the professionals and friends to ensure he makes the best decision?
Sure. I'm going to get to Joel in a second, but very quickly for Kate, because there's people on this call, I think, that could put their hands up. I would mention to Kate, have him reach out to anyone in the financial industry or in the legal industry, these people who are making north of 6 figures, and take an assessment of how many of those people will tell you like they're actually really happy, right? Quite honestly, and I talk about this with my wife all the time. And for much more wealthy people, look up the Giving Pledge, which I find very interesting, initiated by Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, to encourage billionaires to give away the vast majority of their wealth. And I think they've signed up over 200 billionaires, and that amount is north of 600 billion. And we see this throughout history, that people go into business to be really successful, amass enormous amounts of wealth. It doesn't do it for them with regards to fulfillment and happiness, and it often ends up being given away. Back to Joel. Now, with Joel, it's an interesting one, because if for Joel, for Joel and for anyone else on this call or in Canada, the way I think about investing in Canada, there's really three lanes. You want to do it all yourself. You want someone to do it all for you, and that's usually for high net worth, ultra high net worth people, because they have pretty complex individualized needs. And then my business, which is a hybrid, it's somewhere in between. Someone will help you out when you need it. In Joel's case, where he wants to do it all by himself, which is great, I would say your questions are really around confirming what you're paying for and what you're not paying for. So if you're looking to buy and sell your own securities, make sure, what are the fees? Are there any hidden fees? Under what circumstances? Now, there are operators that have lower fees or no fees. Nothing's free. You might want to understand what are the limitations or restrictions on what you can actually do. And again, if you're buying and selling your own securities to build up your own, if that's what you want to do, but also build up your own knowledge, online, whether it's through Reddit, message boards, other groups, ask people what they're doing and why they're doing it. And you might also want to look into reading up on investing approaches, historical books. I think the book's probably like 80 years old, from Benjamin Graham, The Intelligent Investor. But that's not necessarily what drives a lot of trading activity now. A lot of trading activity now is momentum oriented trading. But even for that, algorithmic trading, there's a lot of really interesting resources online to understand what is really driving and behind this activity. And it's just a matter of skill building. And for those who want to do something in between, where you want to invest for your future, you want to be able to reach someone when you can, but you don't want to be picking your own securities, that's when you would consider a business such as our own. And then finally, if you want a dedicated person who will look after you, know your name, your birthday, your individual circumstances, you would go and cultivate a relationship with that person. And again, I think the starting point is talking to people in your network and see if they know someone, similar to finding maybe a real estate agent or other personalized professional. Who do you work with and why? And do they take care of your needs? And how do you trust this person? So on.
Hmm. Well, we're approaching the end of our fireside chat, so there's still a lot of questions. So I'm going to consolidate these final three questions into a single question. But also, in terms of what Rajan said, yes, if you're interested in exploring a really great investment tool, RBC InvestEase, absolutely, we'd love for you to consider that. We're actually going to be putting a special offer for RBC InvestEase in the chat right now, and we're also going to be sending it to you after this experience. But in terms of the final three questions consolidated into one, basically it's about resources. Like you've already mentioned one, a great book about investing. Are there any resources that you can share for people who want to separate opinion from what's objective? It seems like, for example, Bitcoin is terrible according to Warren Buffett, but apparently it's the greatest thing ever and it's going to be the future of finance. So what is objective? What is opinion? And in the end, can you have any recommendations on some resources that are more factual in terms of fact base? And in terms of this last question about popular culture and it resonating for youth in terms of the financial space, we'll also send some examples of that post, which could be good for young people. But in terms of resources, anything that is just a little bit further away from opinion and more towards just, hey, this is a best practice, try, test it and true. If you can read this one book, you'll probably be okay.
Mm-hmm. I hope everyone's seeing my eyes going down because I've been looking at the name of this incredible person. His name is Ramit, and I can't find his last name right now because I'm trying to be polite and not keep looking down at my phone. So Ramit, if you just type Ramit Money Expert, he will come up. He has a series of books that I found very foundational and excellent. I'd also recommend a book called Smart Women Finish Rich. Again, I think that for us women, I think that we sometimes need to have a different approach to the way that we come to this topic. I think that there's different values there for many of us as women in terms of the way that we want to invest or the way that we want to show up. So I think that it's interesting to be able to read some books that are tailored more directly to us in that way. Tony Robbins has some really, really great stuff too that I have enjoyed and liked. Yeah, those are some of the foundational books that I would recommend for sure.
Amazing. How about you, Rajan?
Those are all great suggestions. I would say philosophically, the only thing that's the closest thing in fact when it comes to money by way of analogy is kind of a calorie approach. If what you burn is greater than what you take in, it's kind of a math thing, right? So like there's a certain amount of money that's coming in, there's a certain amount of money that's going to go out, and then what's left is going to be what is stored. That is honestly and truly, that is the only real, I would say, fact when it comes to money, at least when it comes to saving and investing, is that's the only way that you can get started. And then when you have that amount that's left, then it's just a matter of how do you fulfill, like what do you do once you have that basket of money? And from my perspective, there's three things. You can do it all by yourself. And if you want to do it all by yourself, that's where you might want to educate yourself on stocks, bonds, crypto, and all that other stuff that Jason trades when he's not hosting webinars. But honestly, like if that's not your thing, don't worry about it, right? Like there's so many things that I cannot do, right? Like there's work that needed to be done in our house and I would love to do it, but it would take me like 3 years to do it that a professional would take like 3 days. We have a car, even though we live in the city. When it's time to change on a winter tires, I don't do that by myself because I would probably kill myself and the car would go rolling down the street, right? Like I just can't do that. I hire a professional, and that's okay. And I think you just have to determine, like, do you want to do it all by yourself? And if you do, have at it. And if you don't, how much attention do you want to pay for, right? Like, do you want something really bespoke and personalized? And if so, amazing. There are solutions out there for that. And if not, there's something in between and the fees go down, but that your needs would be more narrow. I would also say though, like when it comes to educating yourself, it's changed in my lifetime. When I was younger, it was, reading books by Warren Buffett and Peter Lynch and Benjamin Graham, and they're instructive and they're important. And I have my CFA, and in hindsight, they're interesting, but to say that they are fact would suggest that you could put it into a test tube and you'd get a definitive answer every single time. And this stuff is not a pure science. So I think what's important is you have to seek out, and if it's through social media, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, you have to look for a person who resonates with you, who communicates in a way that speaks to you, and you have to build up your own comfort because everyone's going to be in a different spot. And if you're at a point where you're looking up individual stocks or TFSAs versus RRSPs, you can put that into Dr. Google. That's a very specific question. I think for most people, they're actually just looking to build up their baseline of confidence. And that's just kind of part of your personal journey. And you'll have to kind of put yourself out there and see who speaks to you, and who do you like listening to. So for me, I kind of have a grab bag of people. There's Jessica Morehouse in Canada, who has a personal financial blog. I find her to be very interesting. I'm connected to her and I follow her on LinkedIn because that's where I think she posts most of her content most frequently. But it's just kind of here and there, and some of the most interesting stuff that I read comes from other people because they know that I'm interested in reading what other people have to say. And that's what I mean. Like, you have to kind of put yourself out there, build your own network of people who are looking for the same information, and see what you find.
That is a great way to end this fireside chat. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us today. Rhiannon and Rajan, that was a great conversation. Thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing you at the next, and we're actually going to be hosting another financial literacy experience with RBC InvestEase very soon, hope in next month. So looking forward to sharing that with everyone. Thank you again for taking the time. Stay safe, and thank you for supporting for TL Insider. We look forward to seeing you at our next experience. But Rhiannon and Rajan, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.